All right, we'll call this meeting to order. And we'll ask Director Hocker to do the roll call.
All right. Director Hocker? Here. Director Kelsenberg?
Here.
Director Petrie?
Here.
Director Pobini? Director Thielander?
Here.
Chair Sherman? Here. All right, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I would like to make a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Can I get a second?
Second.
Director Petrie? All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Tonight we have 2 items on the consent agenda. One is for the payment of invoices from 2/25/23 to 3/10/23. And the second is our American Indian Education Program annual compliance. I'll make a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda. Is there a second? Okay, Director Kelsenberg? All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Great. Now we will move into our study session. The first of 3 topics we'll be talking about this evening. The first is facility conversations. So welcome to Carissa.
Hi everybody. Thank you. So tonight we just wanted to share a little bit of information about the conversations we're going to be having over the next several months, actually into the fall really, about our facility needs. And this is a conversation we're beginning, but it's actually continuing. Many of you will remember back in the 2019-2020 school year, we had a facilities planning team come together and look at the needs of our buildings. And they had put together a recommendation that was shared with the board back in I think it was February of 2020. And then we know what happened right after that. COVID came and we got our priorities shifted for a while, and we were able to kind of put that aside. But now we're back to really needing to address some of these issues that are good things that are happening in our district as our enrollment grows. But it is time for us to, again, talk about our facilities. So since January, you are well aware we have some new information. We had a demographic study that was conducted and released to you and the public in January, and we learned that we do have a lot of enrollment growth projected for the next 5 to 10 years. Anywhere between, low end was about 300 kids in the next 5 years, up to 1,000 students coming into our district in 10 years. And that adds a little bit more urgency to the work we already knew that we had to do with our facilities. In February, we started having some meetings with some of our city officials. We know that the growth is kind of occurring in some spots of our district, not district-wide, but we've known for a while that there's growth in the southern part of our district. There's also some growth in the central part of the district, and that's coming from turnover as well as new homes being built. We did conduct a survey of our community in February, and you had those results shared with you just a week ago, I believe. And that showed that there is quite a bit of support in our community for our facility needs to be addressed. The community is willing to support some of those projects. And at this point, we just tested a few things. And most of that was based off of the information we had gathered from our initial facilities study and then some of the information from our demographic report. Now the fun part begins. We really get to have the conversations about, so now what? So in April, we're going to have a facilities team come back together, and they will look at the original recommendations that came out back in 2019-2020 and the new information we have as far as the new demographic numbers and enrollment trends that we're seeing, the information we gathered from the community survey, and feedback that we're getting from our community as we're having this conversation. Ultimately, they'll put together some recommendations. The board will have some discussions over the summer, and potentially a bond referendum could be on the ballot in November. So for a facilities planning team, we're looking at bringing together many of the people who were on the original group so that we have some of that consistency, and also looking to bring on some new folks as well, making sure that we're representing all of our different communities across the district. And as I mentioned, they'll be looking at what we've talked about previously as well as what our needs are moving forward. We are planning for a lot of community engagement. I think it's really important to say that, there's already chatter in our community. People are already hearing that we're having these conversations. And so there's already people kind of wondering what this is about and how do they get involved. We will have a lot of opportunities for people to formally and informally give feedback and share their thoughts and help us come up with the best solution for our students now and into the future. So already we've had some informal conversations. The superintendent's talked with families at Anderson at their PTO. We've met with the Bayport city officials and Lake Elmo city officials. The Superintendent's Community Advisory Council has met a couple of times to talk about this, Partnership Plan Board of Directors. And we're going to be holding some more formal conversations in the coming weeks. We just secured these dates, so I know some of you have already asked, but as of yesterday afternoon, we have March 27th set for Anderson School Community. We will be sharing information with families in the next couple of days, but again, we just got this lined up late yesterday. So they will be getting an official invitation to come out and have a community listening session. So we can share with them some of the information that we have, get some ideas, feedback, and really try to brainstorm some solutions, knowing that Anderson is one of the schools that is already pretty crowded and is going to see a lot more growth. Similarly, Lake Elmo, that's another school where we know for a decade or more we've been talking about Lake Elmo, continued growth there, as well as just an older building that has a lot of challenges. So we will meet with them on April 18th. And then throughout the summer, we'll be holding sessions where people can come in and provide feedback as we start to put together some options through our facility planning team. We'll go out to the community and find out what they think, what do they like, maybe what concerns or questions they have, and then we can continue to roll all of this information together to come with a final recommendation or options for the board. We'll also be doing a second community survey sometime this summer as we start to put more of a possible bond proposal together. We would go out to the community and we'd have more information at that time about specific projects, what costs might be, how that might actually impact a taxpayer. So there'll be a lot more information at that time for people to respond to. So today we just wanted to give you kind of the process and timeline and answer any questions that you have. But again, just reminding people we are really early in this conversation. No decisions have been made. We're really trying to just test out different ideas, gather a lot of feedback. We know that we have some challenges with growth, but also a lot of opportunities.
Great. Thank you, Carissa. I'm assuming we can ask questions, so Director Petrie, go ahead.
Thank you for that. I'm really, I think it's a really great idea to have these listening sessions in the communities that might be affected by this. And I'm just sort of wondering how you think those are. Is it just going to be a matter of, we go and just listen to what people have to say, or is it more of a two-way conversation? Are we going to be asking for ideas? What exactly do you envision that those are going to look like?
We're still planning those. I think it's really intended to provide some information on the front end and then have kind of a opportunity for people to talk through some of the information, come up with ideas, address concerns that they have, really be able to listen to what people have to say. We're probably going to work with a facilitator to hold these meetings. It's just nice to have somebody who's really neutral, who can come in and make sure that everybody's voices are heard. So we're still working out some of those details, but it's not meant to be a time for people to just kind of come in and talk to us, because it's a learning process for all of us. So we want people to understand the issues that we're facing and then help us come up with possible solutions.
I would say two things. We want to really be able to clearly enunciate the why we're looking at doing this. People need to understand if there's going to be some potential change, why that change is coming. The second thing I'd really like to emphasize is we are looking for solutions. We are working with our community partners, what's the best potential solution we can come up with to meet the needs of our students, while at the same time being cognizant of the needs of the community. And I think if we can do that and work together on solutions, we'll come out with a much better product in the end. So that's what I'm looking forward to. There's nothing pre-baked coming into this. The only pre-baked concept is, okay, we got 200-year-old schools and we have some significant growth challenges. All right, what can we possibly do moving forward? And so that's where we're looking for solutions.
Do you anticipate is the board going to be attending those listening sessions? Or I guess I want to clarify and make sure that that's the plan, or is that not the plan?
Well, we initially, again, we are developing this as we're going along here. The initial thought was these would be like expanded PTO meetings open to the community.
Okay.
We can certainly have the conversation on, whether the board wants to attend or not. I would say if the board doesn't attend, it would still be suggested that maybe some board representation is there.
Okay.
Depending on how you want to do it.
Okay. So if board directors have thoughts on that, you can we can talk about that, I guess, now or just let me know too.
And I guess being new to the school board, what ways can the school board help to support this process? Just for my own understanding.
I think at this point, it really is truly about listening. I mean, we've already gotten a few emails from people, and I think that's important for us to just help people understand where we are in the process and the fact that there are opportunities for them to participate, to share their ideas. And I think the board's job is always to listen, to find out from the community what are the concerns, what are the questions that they have, help get that information to us so that we can make sure that we're addressing things as we go along. And ultimately, we're asking the community to really help share, as Dr. Funk said, ideas and solutions. And so helping just educate them on the issues before us, the challenges and the opportunities, and gather feedback.
Would it be possible, I know people have reached out to me and asking, where do I send can I email my thoughts and ideas and suggestions? Is that something that they can also do to?
Sure.
Okay. So if they can't make a meeting, or if they, if they have an idea, I know we're kind of fully exploring anything that kind of comes up, so
Definitely.
good for the community to know. Yes, Director Hocker.
Thanks. This has been helpful in just kind of understanding what point in the process we're at, because I think the little bit we're hearing is a little nervousness that things are, as you said, pre-baked into this. And I think to just reestablish where we are in this process, that this is really early on, and we're all learning and trying to come together with solutions before we bring it to the taxpayers, if that is the direction we're going in. So I think that hopefully this will really produce a great outcome, both for the community and for the district, because we do have a lot of needs that need to be addressed. And I appreciate your work in doing this in a very thoughtful manner.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Great.
Will this be, I've noticed on the website, this is all kind of on there. Will this be put on the website then
Yes.
too, so people can access it?
Yes.
Newsletters?
So we will definitely be updating these dates on our website. And as I mentioned, we'll be sending information directly to families at Anderson and Lake Elmo to let them know about those meetings specifically. And then as we have more opportunities for those more formal feedback sessions throughout the coming months, we will definitely be sharing that through our newsletter, out on social media, always on our website.
Great. Thank you very much. This has been very helpful. I appreciate the update. All right. Topic 2 are elementary science materials. Welcome, Caleb.
Thank you, Chair Sherman, members of the board, Superintendent Funk. I'm pleased to share with you tonight an update on our elementary science curriculum conversations. This is part of our curriculum review process, which, it's going through it automatically here. Somebody wants me to go faster tonight.
That wasn't me, Caleb.
All right. So this is part of our curriculum review process, which is part of our policy 603 and 606. As I mentioned a couple months ago, we use essentially a 10-year instructional review process that aligns itself with the standards that come out of Minnesota Department of Education revision process. So it's about a 10-year process for them to review those standards. We get the standards, and then we look at our instructional program, evaluate kind of where we've been, where we need to go, look at the standards, analyze what are the new shifts in our instruction, and then look for the materials and the professional development necessary to implement those new standards. So last spring, I had presented before you some of those instructional shifts that we saw taking place. We talked about the impact that they had on our science course sequencing, and I had shared with you the plan for the middle school materials. So tonight we'll be focused on the changes at the elementary level, and I'll go through the process that we've engaged to identify a new set of materials for elementary. So why do we need some new materials? Why do we need a new curriculum? Quite frankly, our standards are, 10 years old. So in 2019, Department of Education revised those through the legislative rulemaking process. Those have gone through the process, and now they are ready to be implemented. We will have a new MCA science test administered in spring of 2025. So we want to make sure that we have instruction preceding that so that students are prepared, which, as you recall, back in the spring, that's why we started with 6th grade this year, so that those students, when they get to be 8th grade and take the 8th grade science MCA, that they are prepared and ready, which is also why we would like to implement new science instructional materials for our elementary this year, so that, again, those current 3rd graders, they'll have at least 1 year working in those new standards and materials prior to the assessment in their 5th grade year. Also importantly, our current FOSS materials are old. So it's not just addressing new standards, but we do have old materials that certainly do not meet the level required in the standards. And again, they're old. So it's a little hard to track down. This predates a lot of people who are in the Department of Teaching and Learning, but I believe FOSS was first implemented in 2006, somewhere in there. FOSS stands for Full Option Science Sequence. There were cuts to the department. We had purchased new materials. The standards then came in 2009, so there's some overlap there. Long story short, the materials are old. We need to establish some curricular consistency. So this is some of the tasks that we completed as part of the process that's laid out in Policy 603 and 606, evaluating the current state of the program, really digging into those standards. I mentioned there's a significant instructional shift that takes place. We can talk more about that later if you'd like. We consulted with some experts in the field, professor over at University of River Falls, who actually works with us quite a bit with teacher candidacy placement, student teachers. We reviewed a number of materials, 8 or 9, narrowed it down to 3, had samples brought in, dug deep into what those samples included, identified 2 to go further with, invited vendors to come in and present and really walk us through in a deeper way what those materials had to offer. We then offered some opportunity for teachers to come in and view those alongside our committee so that the committee could walk them through what we've been learning, what we've been looking at, how to understand the standards in relationship to the materials and the assessment components. So we did get some feedback from our staff. We also have presented to the World's Best Workforce Learning Advisory. They also, wasn't just a presentation, they were part of that open house essentially for the materials. So they spent a good half hour digging into materials, and they generated lots of great questions. I would say on par with where our teachers were looking at the materials and asking questions. What does this look like? What does that look like? So it really was an opportunity for that committee and the parents in the community to dig into those materials.
So Caleb, I'm going to stop you a second. So consistent with Policy 606, we had the opportunity for parental and community feedback in the adoption or the recommendation of the adoption of science materials.
Correct.
Okay.
Through the World's Best Workforce Learning Advisory.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So through that process, we determined that Smithsonian Science for the Classroom would be the best tool of the ones that we evaluated to meet our needs around instruction and the new standards. So we found this tool to be fully integrated in a student-centered science approach. It really engages students in that phenomena-based science instruction, really looking at that storylining, looking at the phenomena of a science element, and then using inquiry skills and problem solving to go deeper into the learning. It's organized around 4 modules at every grade, each focused on a different strand within science. It does integrate literacy readers into the content, so students are reading about science as well as conducting experiments, and they're also creating models around what they're learning, along with notebooks and journaling and identifying and marking observations and analyses at every level. It also provides some design challenges through collaborative performance assessments based on what they're learning. One of the steps that we did engage in the process that really helped us narrow between the 2 final curricular materials was to take a look at our portrait of a Stillwater science student, portrait of a graduate, to really understand what are we thinking about when we are thinking high quality science instruction. What do we want our students to be thinking about? What's the work that we want them engaged in? Which led us into the bold elements there, really looking at student questioning, hands-on experiences, students' ability to analyze and interpret data, really engaging in conversations around evidence to form analyses with that real-world application. So with those precepts in mind, our committee dug deep into both sets of materials and found Smithsonian to come out higher, creating that sense of wonder for our students, really looking at that science notebook in an authentic way, authentic assessment, authentic student work. So it's not worksheets, right? It's actually digging into the science, journaling in their interactive notebook, looking at the data, drawing conclusions, creating models. So it really does provide that rigorous, sophisticated science approach, even at the youngest levels that we're looking for. So with Smithsonian Science for the Classroom, our students will engage in high-quality science instruction. We'll create that consistency that we're looking for across the district. We'll be providing those opportunities for students to develop their deep questioning and inquiry skills. That hands-on exploration is critical in Smithsonian, alongside that real-world application. And that's really where the phenomena-based instruction comes in. They see how science plays out in the real world, in their lived experiences. It also will focus on teaching students to analyze and interpret that data and engage in those conversations around evidence. So the implementation plan, we currently have 9 teachers across 4 buildings and 5 grades who have a sample. They have a module, then they've received some training from Smithsonian, an online training around that module. So they'll be digging in, even implementing one of those modules yet this spring. And so they'll be able to gain that firsthand experience, see what works, what doesn't work, where some of the pitfalls might be, some of the obstacles that we might need to overcome. And so we're able to work alongside them with that and then apply what we've learned from that experience into the full implementation that would take place the following year. So next year for professional development, we utilize August workshop days as well as PD throughout the year, utilizing Smithsonian trainers. So part of the contract that for the purchase agreement, they will build in trainers into that, and depending on the level, there will be additional trainers given that we could extend throughout the year or into future years. So we'd also want to build in opportunity for grade levels to come together to share what's been working, share some of the ways they've overcome different obstacles that they've experienced, and just reflect together and celebrate the work that they're engaged in. We also have opportunities for those ongoing professional development through our instructional coaches, through those initial implementers, through our job embedded professional development, part of QComp, and the learning lab visits that teachers are engaged in, getting into each other's classrooms, seeing what works and how to do it themselves, as well as our collaborative action team. So not just the formal PD from the Smithsonian and use of PD days, but opportunities for ongoing reflection and engagement with folks. And then as we work towards implementation, part of our process is to identify those instructional expectations, a loose, tight framework. These are the must-dos as part of the program, especially in year one, and what that might change, that might grow as we get deeper into implementation and understand the materials better. We'd also create a feedback guide for principals and coaches and teachers when they go into a classroom to look for certain components so that they can grow in their own practice or support those individuals with that feedback. So with that's a quick overview and update of our elementary science. Happy to take any
Great.
questions.
Yes. Director Kelsenberg.
Okay, so Smithsonian, is that pretty common throughout neighboring districts and throughout the state? And have they been around for a long time?
So the Smithsonian Science Program is fairly new. It's connected to the Smithsonian Museum, and so they've been around a long time, and they certainly have credibility to stand on. But I believe this was one of their first forays into creating a science materials, and it aligns directly with the new national standards around science. In terms of other districts using it, there are a few, and we did have some conversations with them. It's fairly new, and so it's not widespread.
Caleb, this was a phenomenal presentation. You answered most of my questions. I only have just a couple areas that maybe if you could elaborate on, or maybe there'll be an opportunity down the road. Just costs and maybe plans on how to measure results based on this investment.
Sure.
Can you speak to anything about that now, or is that later to come?
Let me start with the results. So we would certainly utilize the new MCA. We're not able to translate science learning from the current MCA to the new because the standards do change. However, we can certainly look to see at trends and what progress might look like. We can make some estimations there. Certainly within the program itself, there are assessments and rubrics on those professional, the performance assessments. So we'd be able to gather some of that data and
Let me help you out
Yeah.
there too, if I can. So I think two things that he really talked about were consistency of development across the district and professional development of the staff. I think the results we should see will be directly reflected in how well we educate our staff on teaching our students. So I think that, as he said, the test is changing, but I think we're putting the systems in place to support our staff to better educate our students. So that's how I would, my answer to that question was that's how I would see achievement increasing
Okay.
for that piece.
And how do we because honestly, as a district, and I think you pointed this out to us when you came in, Dr. Funk, we have not been very consistent with curriculum adoptions.
Right.
And my guess is that with the new standards changing, and it's a total change in mindset in science at a state level, we might see some down before we hit up because you're getting used to a new new
Right.
questions on an MCA test, new standards, new curriculum, new training. So I guess,
yeah, I would even hesitate to say we'll see it down. We're going to create a new baseline with that
Okay.
new assessment is how I would frame that. And so that would be the new place where we start to say, how do we grow? How do we improve from there? What's the additional professional development we need as teachers in their collaborative action teams look at the data that they're gathering on the various assessments? what are the changes that they can make in their implementation at a very localized level, that grade level in their school. We can do the same thing across the district in grade level teams. And so those would be some of the metrics that I would look to see, are we growing, are we changing, as we're waiting to see what the impact is on that formal MCA that only comes in 5th grade for our students.
And I think that that's important for the community to note that that's a really good way to phrase it. That's the new base, that's the new baseline that we're establishing. And then from
The
there.
other thing I would say along with that is the curriculum we are recommending for adoption here is aligned to the state standards, which our curriculum, he's saying 2006, I think it's 2001. Our science curriculum is that 20-some years old. So I would imagine, I'm not going to imagine, I will state we'll see improvement because we're going to be teaching the current standards.
Thank you.
Not only teaching the standards, but teaching them in the way in which they're designed to be taught.
Yes.
So I think that's the other critical element.
And then my only last piece was just cost, and I'm assuming it's within budget if we're not seeing anything else, but anything that we would want to know specifically at this point in terms of, I think it's just good to
Yeah.
educate ourselves what curriculum does cost. We've been not very good as a district
Yeah.
in understanding those costs.
So I have reached out to Smithsonian for quotes, and so we've got a number of different models that we'd be able to look at. Part of it would be the length. So some of these are based on materials. There's a high consumable component to that. In fact, even receiving live specimen, right? And so there's a series of vouchers, and you can be a 3-year, a 6-year, a 9-year kind of arrangement. And so those are some of the details that we'll be taking a look at. What's the most appropriate time frame for a purchase agreement? Certainly the most significant costs are the kits themselves, the non-consumables that we'll be able to use for 10 years. But it would be a matter of how many years we want to commit to on the front end. That would really drive that final
And that'll be
cost.
coming to you for approval at some point. So you'll
Okay.
see what that cost is at whatever they end up deciding.
It's well over the threshold where you need to act on it. So.
Okay, perfect. Yes, Director Hocker, did you?
Thank you. Well, you kind of mentioned one of my questions about the ongoing costs. So I'm going to just switch directions a little bit. I really appreciated the slide about policy and how we now can see how it works in reality to implement this whole process through our policies. So I really appreciated you kind of walking us through that. The one thing that Dr. Funk brought up was the community and parent feedback and their opportunities to get involved. Is there any other opportunity? That's the main opportunity, is to work through the World's Best Workforce at this point, correct? And then going forward, I can just anticipate the questions of how do I get involved in curriculum going forward if this is kind of the science, I believe the science is ready to go. We're going to be approving it shortly, next meeting. So just can you talk a little bit about how community members or parents can get involved in that curriculum process?
So I would say there's a couple different ways. So at the base level, really it's that partnership with the teacher to receive the feedback on what the instruction's looking like in the classroom, to understand what are the upcoming units that are happening tomorrow, right? Or the ways that a parent can get involved and have the conversations with their kids around what they're learning in the moment. So that's the first place I would go to for how parents and really parents in large mass can be involved in the learning of their kids. It's directly with their teacher. In terms of the committee, the World's Best Workforce Learning Advisory, we do have representation. The goal is to have representation of parents and teachers from every school in the district. And then we do have a handful of community at-large positions, slots available as well. And so as we approach as we reform that committee for next year, we'll open that up again. There is on the district website an inventory for all the different committees that the district has available to parents and community. And so individuals are able to fill that form out, and then we'll review that against the representation across buildings and the areas of the community. So
Thank you.
Yep.
Director Petrie.
So this is K-5 curriculum, correct? What happens with secondary science curriculum?
Yep. So the middle school, as you recall, last year we talked about the Open SciEd curriculum that we brought in for 6th grade. So 7th grade teachers are going through training with that. Some have already done it, some are doing it over the summer. And so we'll be receiving those materials in the summer. 8th grade will follow the year after that. And then we, at the high school, we are engaged in conversations with the teachers. What we've been hearing from them largely in our core areas is they don't need textbooks for this instruction. They need the materials, they need time to write the curriculum, they need time to vet the various software programs that they'd utilize to bring in some of those content pieces. But for the most part, what we're hearing is there's not a high need for a traditional textbook approach. And as we talked about in the spring, really the standards aren't designed to be met through textbook learning and reading. Really, it's activating the phenomena and the storylining, digging into the hands-on experiential approach. So we're having ongoing conversation with them. Again, that in 2025, that life science course or the life science exam is going to take place for all students who finish with biology that year. So we'll have new standards in place at that point, and in fact, many of our teachers in biology specifically are already addressing those standards. They are directly aligned in a large way with the national standards, which our teachers have been familiar and have been receiving professional development around. Some of the other subject areas, the big one that we will be creating a committee to create a brand new course, which is in 9th grade. As I mentioned last spring, there are earth science standards that we are required to meet at the high school level. And with the shift of physical science to 8th grade, we're not going to require students to repeat a physical science course in 9th grade. And so that 9th grade course will become an earth science course. And so we'll need to build that. There will likely be textbook resources that we need for that one. Partly because it's just a brand new course and we don't have teachers having been in the process of teaching it at the high school.
Great.
And then I just, a clarifying question here, on the slide it says 2023 to 24 is professional development. So is implementation going to happen that year or the following
Implementation
year?
would be that year as
Okay,
well. Yep.
all right, okay. So that would be, there would be August workshop days, and then the new curriculum would be rolled out, and there would be continuing
Exactly.
training throughout the course of the year.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Director Thielander.
Yeah, thank you, Caleb. Very good information and appreciate the presentation. So, yeah, I think as an elementary aged parent of two students, I love the idea of the hands-on exploration, the real-world application, just to kind of excite them around all things science. And obviously, the Smithsonian has a really strong brand name. Is that, I guess it'll be interesting what some of those costs look like. Are we paying a premium for that brand or not? Or, we'll see. But I like the idea because, in our house, we have a lot of Smithsonian-related, commercial materials. And so you kind of laid out on one of the slides, improving student learning. Are those kind of those factors that you kind of laid out for the science for the classrooms? Has that just really was a step above everything else that you had saw within the science curriculum that you felt like this is going to hit the bill of meeting standards, exciting kids, and really helping their learning?
So the other set of resources we looked at, we did cost out as well as just as part of our process. They were comparable, if not maybe a little bit more expensive. Price wasn't the driver on this, however. I would say the piece that created a significant difference for us in looking at the two sets of materials were, one, the integrated readers. It was an add-on for the other component, which you could use or could not use. Not that it's required to use it, but it integrates the learning And so there were additional opportunities for students to engage in content through literacy. So that was important. But I think, again, I go back to that slide where we talked about the vision for a Stillwater science student, and really the depth of learning that Smithsonian provided, and the ability for students to really engage in an authentic way, not filling out a workbook or worksheets to engage in that work.
Great.
Those were the driving factors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final questions?
Sure.
Yes, Director Pelzer.
Once this is adopted or decided on, what are we committing to? Are we committing to purchasing a license from Smithsonian and then materials separately, or we'll be seeing these expenses, right?
So the majority of the purchase price is the kit with the non-consumables, and then the annual consumable price for the live specimen and whatnot. There is a software component to it to support the teacher instruction, but it's not necessarily designed in a way that students would go to the website to do a major chunk of their learning. And so that's not a significant component to the program as much as the hands-on work. I will add, however, both programs we looked at also had Spanish versions, so our Amigos Unidos program will be able to utilize the same program alongside the English-speaking peers.
All right, great. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. I just have to say, from a board perspective, this was an incredible presentation. I really appreciate just seeing what's coming out of the curriculum teaching and learning group right now. It's been so long since we've been able to have some sort of structure. So thanks to Dr. Funk and yourself and everyone working with you to make this happen. It's exciting for our district. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. And our last item on tonight's agenda is Budget and Finance 101. And Marie is going to come up and work with us on that.
And there'll be a test on this
Yes.
later.
Formulas in there, I got to study.
Oh, buddy system, called Marie, my buddy.
And I should just say that we're having Marie here today. We have new board members. Marie is new to the district as well, and we just thought it would be a good time to kind of talk a little bit about finance. It's a major responsibility we have as a board, and how we can work together to meet the needs of our students.
Great, thank you. So, good evening, Chair Sherman, members of the board, superintendent, community. So this evening, we're going to walk through some of the overall topics of finance and look as a district, some of the key areas that the school district looks at finance, and specifically how finance interrelates with the school board, but also the bigger picture of finance in terms of how it impacts the overall school district and community. So you can see here, just first and foremost, what the finance department and the services that are provided. And you can see some of those are accounting related, but it goes deeper than that. It's budget, fiscal forecasting, auditing, compliance, and then on the right side there, capital planning, selling our long-term debt in order to make those projects go, and also looking at enrollment, enterprise resource planning, that finance and HR system, and all that transactional system of record data. And then our MARS, our student reporting. So once you have the enrollment, making sure we get the revenue in. And then also payroll, purchasing contracts, and that risk management insurance. So it's a larger scope there. And we're going to walk through just some of the basics of school finance. This is a piece from our Constitution, Article 13, Section 1. And so it basically sums up, it's the duty of the legislature to establish that general uniform system of schools and public schools, and the legislature shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools throughout the state. So we can kind of see what's going on right now, and the funding involved throughout. And that's what we're going to highlight next, is just some of those basic education finance characteristics. As you know, they're highly categorical in nature. There's just not a simple formula. You can see as we handed out that school financing education in Minnesota guide that we'll talk about next. Taxes are the primary revenue source. Our local education authority, our finances are highly regulated. I don't think I've been through one audit that there hasn't been a lot of detailed questions, and finances are administered publicly. And so this manual or guide that you have in front of you, this is put out annually, and it is a great guide. I am not going to sit here tonight and go through it in detail. However, I think it is a great time right now to take a look at that in your spare time. And I'll just point out that page 11 has a lot of great information on the basic formula allowances that would coincide with a lot of what is going on at the legislature. And for those in the audience, there is a copy on the back table. That
People running to get it.
yes, everybody's running to get it back there.
Oh, sorry.
So it is very detailed school finance. I've been in this world a long time. It is not just a simple formula. They change constantly, and you have to keep up with that because it does impact school revenue and budget. And so when we go through the process of coming to the board, there are a lot of activities that also require board action. And this is not an all-inclusive list. This is probably touching the surface of what we come to board members and have approved or accepted reports. And so you'll see up there, first and foremost, the annual budget and the guidelines, or what some would call assumptions, your budget assumptions, financial resolutions at the annual Board of Education meeting, budget revisions, annual financial report, or the financial statements, otherwise known as, modified or new policies, contracts that are $175,000 or more. But not only that, there may be others, other contractual awards, requests, RFPs that we may want to bring forward. There are state, federal, or local reports or applications. Borrowing funds, we haven't done that in a long time. That was a long time ago where the state had changed our funding formulas, and we had to borrow money in the past. That's hopefully behind us. Levy certification, monthly operating authority, otherwise known as the payment of invoices, which you just did on the consent agenda. Sales of bonds, certificates of participation, and bond refundings, which we are looking at one potentially this fall. That will save a significant amount of money. And then sales, transfers, or leases of property that get into capital again. So anytime throughout the calendar year, we could be in up to 3 fiscal years at once, and that is key. This is, again, not all-inclusive, but it gives just a highlight of things that are going on in the fiscal world, and you can just kind of see, I won't go through this in detail, but for at least the first the start of the school year, we are really working on closing our books from July through December. We're also working on levy planning. We're also looking at enrollment for the fall and also looking at that overall forecasting, kind of gearing up for the budget season. And so that, in a nutshell, we're looking at adjusting, but also prepping and gearing up for the budget and looking, kind of reflecting back on how we did in the previous fiscal year and planning ahead. So, and also July really kicks off that preparation for the next fiscal year already with that levy. And we start processing that levy for final certification in December. That planning starts in July already with our LTFM application and coming to you. And then January through June is really pulsing that budget and really getting the budget for that next fiscal year, working a lot on staffing, budget allocations, and budget revisions for the current year. So you can see that current fiscal year and next fiscal year is really the focus, and adopting that next fiscal year's budget, which by statute is before July 1st, or the district cannot operate by statute. So that is key for us as a district. So I'm going to just pause there to see if you have any questions at this point. Otherwise, I'm going to touch on our fund balance and GASB 54, which is our Governmental Accounting Standards Board. There's multiple of these.
Any questions? Okay, good to move on.
So fund balance, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board basically set a standard where districts must comply with allocating fund balance into 5 different areas. And there's an order of fund balance use. And our policy here in Stillwater does comply with that. I did hand out the fund balance policy because it's a little hard to see on the screen. And basically, our fund balance policy is the unassigned general fund balance. It's the one that is the least restrictive, and that must be for the general fund at least 5% of our annual budget. And we ended the year that's in our financial statements at 2%. And so those amounts, again, if you were just to calculate that, that unassigned at 2% was about $2.5 million. And we are striving to get to that 5%. And that is our goal this fiscal year, to end at that 5% level. And that's about $6.2 million. So that is our goal. We will strive to get there, and we'll work to get there. Couple things that I'll say about our GASB and our policy is there is a order of resource use, and I'm going to flip to this audited fund balance area. This is right out of our Clifton Larson Allen audit from last fiscal year, June 30th. And what it designates is the order or the hierarchy. And the top hierarchy is where you cannot spend. There's an order of spending. And basically, the non-spendable is either your prepaids or your inventory of your general fund. And those are basically what I'll call hands-off. They're already spent on future items or inventory within your general fund, and they're already designated for a purpose. The next order or hierarchy within the fund balance is our restricted funds, and those may look more familiar. Those are areas such as student activities, so we have accounts within the schools They may be for athletics or student activities where there are donations or students are collecting, there's activities, either the teachers or donations at the specific schools. Students have activities in the schools. So we set aside those funds and restrict those funds for that specific purpose. And what you'll see is in that last column, the audited fund balance. And those funds are restricted for that specific use and only can be used for that purpose. And we keep that account in detail for that school, for the purpose, and they're pretty detailed. You'll also see there was also a fund balance in medical assistance, safe schools, and then the larger ones that make up that 16 million are our LTFM, long-term facility maintenance, and our operating capital, which are designated for either specific projects, which Mark has come forward on some of our bids recently, or the operating capital. So that is the largest piece of our overall fund balance. And then committed, we do not have committed, but what committed is designating funding, and the authority is the board designates the funds for a specific purpose. So that's the difference there, and it can only be used if the board commits and uncommits the funds.
Can you give me an example of that? Or, I mean, I don't know if we've done.
It has been in the past, the board may commit funds for either a severance or a long-term commitment for some type of future purpose. The board may commit, and the action would have to be taken.
Okay.
But it's usually for something, for a purpose, for a future designation where it's not necessarily a restricted account that's established by law, but the board still wants to set aside those funds
Okay.
and not have them be part of it's almost like a restriction by the board.
Okay.
And then the next area is assigned. And the difference there is the assignment is done either by the superintendent or the executive director or director of finance. So it's a lower level authority that does not need to go to the board. And so you will see there's an assignment for severance, facility use, improvements, and then some others like grants and donations. So those are a little bit lower level authority and can be utilized as necessary without going to the board. And then last but not least is the unassigned fund balance. And that is, again, and that's up at the top, which is currently at that $2.5 million or 2%. And that is, again, that's the least restricted fund balance. So overall, the district does have that $21.3 million, $21.4 million of fund balance.
And I realize that because you're new, you may not have the background to be able to answer this, but I was interested that, our audited balance finds us with $642,000 in donations. Who do they come from?
There's a lot of just different funding sources, and I can get some information to you and do that research. I've been seeing.
It's fine, but I just was are these just people from the community who just love our schools and want to give us money for a purpose?
And it might be classified differently. It might be donations such as partnership or some different areas, and I can certainly provide that information. It might be the way the auditors are also laying that out, but it might be donations through the partnership or PTO.
The partnership is its own 501c3, so its finances are separate. So, but did you, in Albert Lee, did you have?
Not that number. Nothing, I don't recall ever that being a significant line item number.
Okay,
And-
I'm just
yeah.
curious, but it's,
And I always feel like we've even discussed sometimes, because I believe it's like, we approve them in the reporting that we get. And I've always thought, because I too sometimes have looked at that and said, I mean, that's so generous, that should we be calling it out separately almost in some way, on our agenda? Because quite honestly, we have a very generous community that supports our schools, and thank you to them. I mean, that's a good thing to point out. Director Petrie, I appreciate that.
We can certainly, we'll follow up with that.
I think you're busy, you don't need to
Yeah.
put a lot of time into that. I was just sort of curious.
So the next area that I'd like to cover is just some levy basics. And again, this might be review for a lot of you. Again, school levy authority is established in law, and the school budgets are a combination of state, federal, and local funding, including the voter-approved operating and technology levies. So again, those are part of that overall school budget and local funding. Unlike cities and counties, the school levy that was certified just in our past December levy, that funds the following school year, so coming up this fall. Our current levy, the levy revenue is 25.2% of the total district's fiscal '23 budget that we're currently in. So the summer levy process. So districts enter the initial levy data in the Minnesota Department of Education's levy information system in July and August. So there's some initial levy steps that begin as early as July. One of the larger ones is the long-term facility maintenance application and plan, and it is submitted for review to the school board and then to the commissioner by the end of July. And that initial data then is reflected on our first levy run in early September, which informs us of what are those levy thresholds going to be for our ceiling, which produces this lovely 39-page report. And I'm just showing one page of it. And that's kind of the page we go to right away and first skip all those other pages because we want to see the bottom line because we're bottom liners. And that data informs us about what are those levy thresholds, and it's really down in that bottom right corner. I can't really get the red, but if you see down on the bottom, there's to the right corner, there's some percentages, and you can see that 4.53, if you recall our levy, that was what was certified in December. And you'll see the categories there, the general, community service, and the debt service in the total. So that's the page that is, we continue to monitor, but we do have to in detail go through and check everything. And there's enrollment projections that go out 3 to 4 years, and you're monitoring all of that because it impacts your levy. And that's key. And when we monitor that report, there are multiple changes to it that are done throughout September because that data is continually updated by the state. And once we feel like we've got that pretty ready and set to go, we come to the board to advise on setting the levy ceiling or maximum that the district can levy for. That doesn't mean that is the recommendation for the final levy. it means that that's the highest you can go. You can always levy downward, you just can't go up any higher at that point. You can always go lower. And so we always recommend levy the maximum or the ceiling. Again, this must be done by September 30th, and we give our best to give those calculations.
Marie, sorry if I could just, why do we do it that way? Like, why do we need to set the ceiling in September, but we don't actually approve the levy till December? Like, what, is there some rationale
Yes.
behind that?
Yes. What it does is it's giving taxpayers, and that is, the goal is to get out the truth in taxation, the statements that are provided to taxpayers for the truth in taxation hearing. These statements, the property tax statements are mailed in mid-November. And so the state, the county issues about mid-November, the property tax statements. And so you want to give a pretty good idea of what the impact to the taxpayer, of what that taxpayer impact on the homes is going to be with either a ceiling or what you think you're going to levy at the district level. And so we recommend the ceiling. Doesn't always happen that it's the ceiling. It depends. It depends on the year that you're in for a levy. So we always try to also mitigate it and look at different impacts with your planning for your fiscal year. But yes, we do something in September because we know the statements are mailed in November. And so that's the initial reason why the planning for the ceiling by September 30th is there's the work that happens in October and November by the county. So then in December, the state statute requires that all local governments, cities, counties, and school districts hold a public hearing prior to finalizing the levy authority, and it allows for public comment. The hearing must follow the release of the proposed tax notices from the county. And so that estimated mail date, it's mid-November. And then the notice provides information, again, on the estimated taxes. So that final levy certification, though, cannot happen until the truth in taxation hearing is completed. And we must file our levy certification by the end of December. They usually release the date. It falls usually that last week of December. And the final report is signed by the school board clerk. And so some of the factors that impact our school levies. Changes in our tax base, the increases often result in less state aid. There's an equalization factor. Changes in enrollment, the fluctuations, our referendum and some of our other enrollment-based levies do have an enrollment calculation or an enrollment factor. So those will fluctuate based on what happens in our district. Legislative changes, as you can see, to education formulas, those will impact. Referendum inflationary increases, so there is an inflationary factor on our referendum, and that's been hovering around 2%, and I'd be curious what that will be in the future. Pension contribution changes required by law, and also employment changes that drive severance and unemployment levies. That's been changing the past couple of years. And then last but not least, capital bonds, bond refundings, abatements, long-term facilities maintenance, and then our health and safety projects and lease costs. All those have impacts to how we levy and changes there. So you have to be mindful of the changes, especially our long-term facility maintenance has multiple year impact on your levy. And so just highlighting here, these are just pages, again, we won't go through those in detail, but some of these levies do have adjustments in the calculations. And our community service levy, you can see, is a small portion. I'll just say the community service or community ed levy is a small portion of their budget, just highlighting that. Debt service levy, again, funds, pays back basically what we are for our bonds and all our certificates of participation. And you can see the total pay levy that we had for just this past December was about $49.9 million. And so last but not least, I'm just going to cover budget.
And I don't know when
Yes.
a good place to ask this was, or to comment, because I found this very helpful. The legislative information that's been coming out has been outstanding. And I know even as a board member, I'm learning more. I mean, just even understanding that our transportation costs were only covered at 23%. So, I mean, these levies, and you mentioned inflation at 2%, but it's not keeping pace. I mean, all of these things that I think the community just doesn't quite realize. So I just want to plug that in there because I know we're working hard legislatively right now. And so for the community to go out and look at that platform, what you added to it in terms of the actual financial impact to the budget has been really eye-opening for me. So thank you.
So again, just to highlight some things on the influencing factors on a budget. Currently, fiscal year-end projections versus actual revenue and expenditures, that impacts your fund balance. So just making sure that we're keeping on track with all of what our current year is. Enrollment fluctuations impact your revenue, but also your class size and your building capacity. And we're very well aware of that with what we are seeing within the district. Contractual settlements impact your expenditure levels. So anytime you have negotiations or changes within any type of settlements, you have to be mindful of those. Legislative adjustments impact not only revenue, but expenditures. If you have mandates on the other side, you have to make sure that you're accounting for both sides. Previous years, October 1, free and reduced lunch counts. So making sure that we're monitoring that. And I think one of the larger things, or the thing that also we had to be mindful of, is how that impacted federal revenue, and making sure that we accounted for that as part of our maintenance of equity with our COVID funding. Bond ratings. So bond ratings, making sure that we do everything to stabilize our bond ratings or improve our bond ratings, because if those are downgraded, the interest on our borrowing could be impacted and higher interest costs. So always making sure that we're doing everything to keep that fiscal picture positive for a bond rating agency. And then inflation. That's been an influencing factor more recent years than past.
Right, before you move off this slide, for that bond rating, what are some things that we need to be mindful as board members that would impact that bond rating?
Absolutely. So I think the big thing is making sure that we are keeping mindful of fund balance and not utilizing fund balance, keeping that policies. I think making sure that the board is having basically fiscal oversight as a board, making sure that the finance department is providing projections on revenue, expense. It's making sure that there's a management team that is providing that data to the board, and that the board is having that governance of the funding. And I think it's more of that elaboration from the other,
When I've sat
our
on
retreat.
bond rating calls previously, they look at fund balance, look at enrollment trends in your district, which direction are you headed in, or growing as a community. Look at your facilities, okay, upkeep, age, cost. Those all take, and then, of course, a big piece of it is your management team and tenure and how long they've been together. Because what they're doing is basically determining, okay, your risk. And so if you have enrollment that's iffy, your fund balance is not very good, your team is in transition constantly, those are not good factors. So stability helps, I think, with the bond rating.
And with the fund balance, is it more that we have a policy that establishes fund balance, or is it the amount of fund balance?
It's that you have your policy.
Yep.
You're meeting it, and you're meeting it on a consistent basis.
Okay.
You're not all over the place.
So it doesn't matter so much where we set it, as long as we set it? Or is it better if we set it
It's
higher?
it's the higher, the higher you set it, the better.
Okay.
And that you meet it. I think that's the bigger thing, and that you don't use fund balance to balance your fiscal operations every year, like to balance your budget. Your budget should be balanced without having to dip into your fund balance.
And what's the trend on our bond rating right now?
I don't know.
It's AA2, so it's been, I believe, I don't know if it's been stable or not. I did look that up, and it was AA2 from Moody's. Which to me it's a good rating
Okay.
for there's also the external factors, which is, the economy and the economic factors that we can't control. So, I think that things that we can control, we'll put in some best practices in finance to ensure that the board is being updated, and that there aren't surprises and things in fund balance.
And I think it would be, just because a lot of this information is for our new board director, we are under fund balance. I think that would be transparent of us to say, and you're being very transparent about it. But I do find it interesting, the factors that Dr. Funk factored into this, because I do think why we're under fund balance is because of a lot of that destabilization that we had, that transition. I think we've had, 5 different interim finance directors during some turbulent times. And so that lack of maybe consistency and data being received, and I know the board could have taken action to have gotten it back up to the level, but I think we as a board just decided we wanted to get some stability and understand a little bit about what a solid team like yourself and what you're building would recommend. And I know when we were hiring Dr. Funk, his fund balance record is outstanding. And I know he would probably like to see that be well above 5% as a goal. And so we as a board have really wanted to do that. That's something we're interested in doing, so.
We'll get there.
Yeah, just to provide that stability, that background.
And so this is just, again, to highlight the revenue budget for our current year right now. And you will see in a couple weeks a budget revision for not only the revenue budget, but the expenditure budget. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this evening, just to kind of show you what they both look like. And then this is just another way to look at the expenditure budget. Sometimes I like just another way of looking at something and how it fits into the big picture. But you've got your different buckets of funds that make up about $147 million as a whole on the expenditure side for the school district. And we're just going to walk through each one of those and really what the buckets are of funds. And your general fund is about $123.5 million. And the general fund consists of all the activities, really I call it the catch-all, but it's for everything that's not accounted for in a special purpose fund. And that includes our regular special ed classroom activities, but also student district support services, buildings, grounds, operations, maintenance. And it includes all our basic aid, our operating technology levies, comp ed, federal entitlements, major funding components. So there's a lot in the general fund as a whole.
And this is where that cross subsidy, this is where it impacts, right, in the general fund?
Correct. And then our food service fund is about just shy of $5 million, and that must be established in a district that maintains food service program. And those are activities, again, that have purpose of preparation of serving regular and incidental meals, lunches, snacks in connection with school activities. So again, there's a huge, long statute on this. We just pulled out main pieces. Community Service Fund, community education, $7.4 million. You saw that the levy was just a little over $1 million. So you can see their fund is basically providing services to residents in those areas there, multiple different programming and activities taking place in community ed programs. And then building construction fund, again, $1.8 million currently. And again, that can change and fluctuate throughout the fiscal year. That includes the building construction programs from general obligation bonds, certificates of participation. It can be our funds that are held. Also, long-term facilities maintenance funding is in here for any projects that are $2 million or more. So as that changes or could change, we may have transfers from our general fund, long-term facility maintenance, to building construction, depending on those projects. So again, those are just some of the things in building construction. And then our debt service fund, that is just shy of $10 million there. Think of that as our fund that we levy to pay back those bonds. And it also has funds that sometimes sit in escrow if we do that bond refunding. And we hold that in securities that are specified by law. And I always think of this as the fund that sits and pays back the mortgage. And we hold that, it's very restricted. Then last but not least, that's a very small custodial fund that we have here. It's basically a flow-through fund. We receive funds, distribute those. We have no financial benefit. And an example there is we have some scholarships, and they just basically flow through for the benefit of students. So it's about $10,000 there. So last but not least, this is a slide with, again, just pictures. They're It's a Governmental Finance Officers Association, and I just wanted to just highlight this for what I can just recommend for the future and recommend to the superintendent and the board. This is just a picture of priority-based budgeting. And what you see on the left side is the academics and finance kind of walking a path together. And you have the school board, the community, and stakeholders, teachers, principals all at the top, all engaging together on walking that path together with student learning goals, setting, and looking at what's preventing those goals and coming together to also look at strategies and how to pay for those, and then in the end, achieving those long term. So it's really looking and reassessing and realigning funding, and it's done over time. It's not done overnight. It's done incrementally. And so just wanted to give a highlight of that, of priority-based budgeting in a picture and not so much on a spreadsheet, because I think this says a lot more. Mm-hmm. And so with that, I'm going to end. And Superintendent, if you have anything else to add, just wanted to end on that.
I love that graphic. It's a great graphic. Any questions from the board?
Just a comment.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a veteran
Yes.
finance director here, so.
And
nice job.
just for the board's education, this is a lot. What does your team look like? I mean, internally, because some of us don't even know, what does your staff look like?
So currently, we have a financial a supervisor of finance and an accountant. And then we have 2 accounts payable technicians, and then we have 2 payroll technicians. And then we have 2 in enrollment, or 1 in enrollment and 1 in the MARS student reporting. And then also 1 basically assistant to myself.
Okay. Pretty lean, given the amount of the budget here.
Very much so.
That's a lot of work on your plate, so,
Very much so.
yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I ask one quick question? Going back a couple slides, you mentioned the free and reduced funding and the compensatory stuff, and I know that going through the legislature and probably in the next week or so, we're going to have an answer on if we're going to be doing this universal meals program. And knowing, like in Stillwater, we do our own food, but we also, I believe, we provide food for 916 and Matamidi. I'm just trying to look into the crystal ball here, like of how is this going to change things for us? Is it going to change things for us? Like what's going to happen?
So fiscally, we initially looked at the impact of the universal meals, and it was approximately, I believe, 300,000, just off the top of my head.
271.
Thank you. And they did send out, I think it was the MDE, or they sent out an initial spreadsheet. And from one of the proposals that went through, they were looking at putting something together to right-size the compensatory education impact that looked like Stillwater would be held harmless or made whole with the compensatory funding. And I don't know, Superintendent, if you've seen anything?
So just 2 things on that. It passed the Senate today.
Okay.
And I had conversations with multiple senators this morning regarding this whole thing. The second piece that I can share with you, it's a different bill than what's in the House. So it has to go back to the House. But it does impact, it impacts the education budget, $400 million over the next 2 years. We're taking out of general education state dollars to pay for free meals universally. So in this era of huge surplus, okay, I understand that. But again, I've been superintendent since 2005. I've never seen a year like this. And I'm fearful that we're going to go back to how we were when it's 2% a year. And oh, by the way, we have this $400 million, which will be going up, that we're taking out of general education, and we are now paying for these meals. So that is a very significant concern moving forward. The final piece that I'll say with this is whether they establish us or hold us harmless on compensatory, since it won't be tied to a free and reduced formula anymore, it'll probably be another shortfall to the district long-term because there will be not be a mechanism in place to increase it over time. Or at least I'm not aware of a mechanism as our demographics shift. So very concerning from a financial perspective long-term.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you. This was very helpful and very informative, so thank you very much. All right. That concludes our study session this evening, so we are adjourned. Thank you.
Okay.